We're live.
Brilliant.
Welcome to our second live show. We are joined by Mike Halpin and, of course, B.Friendly, man himself, Brian Friend. And what we're here to talk about is what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks now, spotlighting games athletes, all 40 men, all 40 women, as well as the 38 teams. So I don't know. Let's jump right into it. Mike, Brian, what have we been doing the last couple of weeks? Explain it.
Yeah, there's a period of time between the semifinals and the games, and I think that trying to find the balance of telling the relevant stories coming out of semifinals, can take a couple of weeks, and then you really want to start narrowing in on the games field and the athletes that we have competing in this year's version of the CrossFit Games. So we decided to do a little athlete spotlight. We studied each individual athlete based on, first of all, their performances against each other so far this season. And Mike's going to talk about that in a minute. And then in some of the athletes' cases where we have some more information, we were able to use that information, compare it to other trends that we've seen from those athletes throughout the years, and come up with hopefully a little snapshot for fans to kind of key in on some elements of fitness that each individual athlete excels at. And we did that for the first 30 athletes. And then for the top 10, because they are so good at so many things, we kind of flipped it on its head. So instead we said, instead of saying what they're hoping to see at the games or the things that they excel at against their peers, we said the things that they would love to not see this year at the games. As we know, there's, part of the unknown and unknowable element of this sport is not just what is thrown in, but what is left out. And for the top 10 athletes, that's sometimes where the margins come down to. Obviously, the athletes all work on things year round and come in a different shape, condition, preparation than previous years. But for some of them, we have some pretty good clues based on history. And in most of the cases, they actually line up pretty well with what we saw from them this year as well.
What I like about the spotlight, essentially, we call them spotlights, but it's almost like a scouting report of each athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, we hit on a couple things. How many years they've been in they've qualified for the games, including this year. We also discussed, what events they did well in throughout the 16 tests leading up to the games, as well as to test their bottom finishes. And then you give, like you said, pretty much a scouting report on what they want to see at the games until we get to the last 10. And like you said, we talk about what those athletes are probably hoping they're not seeing. So essentially, we call them spotlights, but I like to think of more scouting reports, especially for. I mean, you guys have been pushing it. We've all been pushing it. Is the app that's coming out? I think it might be really good, useful information for those who are playing the games on the fantasy CrossFit app. So, but yeah, I mean, Mike, do you you have anything to say on basically what we've been rolling out the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's been great to read on those. I know Brian and Barkley put a lot of work into those write-ups and like pulling the data out of what I created and what we'll show here tonight. It was nice to see the flip on his head, as Brian called it, because there's so many things where it's like, well, this athlete's sort of great at everything, so it's not. It would fill up Instagram to try to put that all on one slide, but it was good to see like Laura, the call outs there, which I think is pretty well known. But like for other athletes within that top 10, like what they'd either be, well, within the whole top 40, what they'd either be really good at and would love to see and may already be getting rolled out as we're getting closer to the games with some of the announcements. And then as we talked about the top 10, where it may be the things they want to sort of not see Boz and Dave come out with over the next week or so or it gets announced at the games.
So this is the female athlete spotlight page. This is one website, one article that started with 5 women a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago probably. And then we've been adding 5 at a time to it. We added the last 5 women tonight, and we added the last 5 men to the relative, the men's one. They've, but before we talk about those top athletes, I want to show Mike's work. So I want to go to an article that we published tonight that is an opportunity for you guys, if you want to dig into as much detail as you want regarding the 2023 CrossFit Games season. This year, the CrossFit Games team decided to switch it up again. So we have continuous or uniform workouts from beginning to end. So every one of these athletes has done the same 16 workouts to get to this point. And this article gives you a link to both the men's and the women's breakdowns that Mike came up with. We're going to pull one up now and give him a chance to explain what he did to get this here and why it can be a pretty cool tool for you to take a look at too.
You guys surprised me. Which one are you giving me, PC?
Let's see. I don't know yet. I'm thinking. Let's go with the men. We'll go with the men. We'll go with the men. Men first. So I'm going to pull up the men's here. Tradition. Yes. So what are we looking at here, Mike? I just see a spreadsheet with a bunch of names. And numbers.
This is my bread and butter right here.
This is it.
A lot of people's eyes just sort of glaze over when they see stuff like this at work, or and somebody did call it out in the comments. The Heat One fantasy app. This is the thing. Like Tyler and I and others like just love seeing stuff like this. So so with this is all. I'm gonna say the wrong number. 16, I believe. Tests. We're calling them these days, that all of the games athletes did over the complete season so far. So that's open, quarterfinals, semifinals. And as Brian said, previous years, the individual semifinals got to program their pieces. So we'd only see like open and quarterfinals comparable. This year, we're seeing all 16 tests. Well, there you go. All 16 tests spread out here across all of the athletes. And this is then ranking them for only those athletes. So we did put out one a couple months ago at this point. Wow, it's been quite the gap between semifinals and games here, feels like. But we did put one out before that had all 300 something athletes on it or so. This one, it hones in on the 40 athletes that are there. I did just recall that I need to put Ann Haynes on this, but with that news, but with this one, it does look at all 40 athletes. It then compares them and ranks them for just these events, so you can see like who really had the best thruster, who really had the best 1RM snatch in the semifinal event, and so on, and then be able to pick out what athletes you're rooting for. If you're going to play the Heat One app, which athletes may do best in an Olympic total, if you want to base that off of what they did in other lifting events, which athletes may do best in Helen, if you're going to do like try to compare that to what they've done. And a piece of that also is that we do see a lot of analytics around like, well, what have they done over the last like 3-5 years? This is only looking at what they've done this year, because as soon as you start to look at previous years, it can go pretty haywire pretty quick when it comes to comparing some of, especially the younger athletes, comparing them to some of the older athletes, because some of these younger athletes are making still, their 1RM is still growing month by month, year by year. So comparing them to what they did just 12 months ago can change quite a bit.
PC, can you also zoom back in a little bit, back to like 90% or something?
Yeah,
90%. And I think what you said right there is really, that's kind of the whole point, especially when you have rookies. We don't have as much data. You don't have as much data. For instance, someone like Abby Domet. I just listened to her interview on Sevon, and she said herself, like, she thinks she's still getting better. She thinks she's a better athlete now than she was in her semifinals because she's improving. And I think that makes total sense to actually look at the data that we have this year.
Yeah, and we have an understanding, of course, that the athletes all approach each part of the season with a different intent. So some of these athletes that have been doing this for 6, 8, 10 years, what's the level of effort that they're putting into the open, the quarterfinals, and in some cases, even the semifinals relative to an athlete who's just fighting to get there, who's never been to the games, who's been on the cusp, or who's, young and upcoming. And this is their first real foray into this environment and see what they can do. Obviously, we get rookies every year that qualify to the games. and it's, usually the rookies don't do it well at the games, and the reason is because they had to prepare more at semifinals, because that was the test. Like, that was the breaking point of the season for them, and the games is just like the reward. It's the extra for the athletes that are expecting to get to the games. And obviously we know from this year that that's not always a safe bet for everyone, but those that are expecting to get there can approach the semifinal season a little differently, and then have the capacity to change the way they train and ramp it up for the games in a different way. But despite all of that, when you look at this list and you look 1 through 40, there are only a few names that kind of jump out as being in a place that you might raise an eyebrow at. It still seems to filter the best towards the top that we expect to see do well at the games also. Maybe not in the exact order that a lot of are thinking. And then the guys that are, relatively new are just coming in. The really cool thing is that it does sort those athletes that compete at the smaller semifinal events against the North American and European athletes. So we get guys like Kaique Cerveni and Kalian Souza that come out of South America, and it's like, wow, we know they did well enough to make it, but how did those scores actually stack up? And when you start to study something like this and you see, well, Kai's scores on half of the test, 8 out of the 16, were better than half of the field. They were in the top 20. Mm-hmm. Now you start to think a little differently about what the potential for someone like that might be in Madison.
Yeah, and just to say on the go ahead, ask a question. Yeah,
no, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say the formatting a little bit for this. So a couple things we call out. It is color coded. So yeah, dive into this. It's on the website. It is color coded, so you can sort of start to tell that as you scroll down. So that's color coded by the region that they were in. So as Brian was just talking about, you can start to pick out, like, all of a sudden you see sort of Jay Crouch stick out there right in the middle, in Oceania, or some of the other athletes from some of the smaller regions. And then we do sort of try to break down the data a little bit for you. Top 5, top 10 finishes are the next columns there. Test wins we call out. And then the way we scored this is by game style. So if you look at it, there's 16 events that they've all done. That's fairly similar to the games. We don't know how many tests Boz will be bringing out with next week, but that's fairly close to a game style week. So you can look at this and say, okay, well, if these were all fairly CrossFit events, there was obviously some heavy lifting events, there was AB events, things like that. That's the type of things that Boz has been programming. So you can look at that and say, as Brian was saying, the best still sort of rise to the top here when you start to compare them across each other. And that's what shows out. So in this case, Jeff Adler is showing as number 1 across all. And then you can start to compare that against other regions. So there's 2 East athletes right at the top, then 2 West athletes, and so on and so on. You see your first European athlete with Jon Koski. He did not win his semifinal. So that's sort of a call out there to say, there is a little bit of difference here. It isn't just you won the 7 tests at the semifinal. It's who did the best over the season so far.
Was there, for either one of you guys, was there a certain athlete looking at the data and where they fell that just surprised you in terms of whether better or worse than you expected compared to the relative field?
Oh, well, I want to go look at the men's top 5. And I think that we'll get to Dallin Pepper, who shows up number 2 on that list, and talk a little bit about that. But on the other side of that, and we won't go this far down the list tonight. But BKG checks in at number 18 on this. And I'm pretty interested in BKG at the games this year in general. He was not happy with his ninth place finish last year. And for 12 months, that's been sitting in his mind. I don't think that he, is necessarily too concerned with he's certainly not concerned with this at all, but it still is a little bit of a notable outlier at 18th. When you look at like I mentioned, most of the other men that you'd expect to be threatening for top 5s and top 10s come in well ahead of that on this list. So just one name that stood out, maybe in a spot that we wouldn't have expected, would be BKG.
How about you, Mike?
I'd say the South American athletes. Like, I think the focus down there was that they beat Guy, and you start to say, like, well, did Guy not do as well if he's being beaten by 2 other South American athletes? But when you look at them on this list and start looking at like where some of the smaller region athletes compare to some of the larger region athletes with that color coding, like Kaike really stands out that he's within the top 30. So when we start looking at things like cut lines and like that, and again, assessing this as a comparable to a 15 event week at the games, 16 events here, you could start to see that there are these athletes that we would normally maybe discount a little bit coming from a smaller region, that when you put them against head to head on these 16 tests, they sort of show through there and still prove that they're capable of being there. They're not just like sort of, okay, well, who did you beat down in South America or Africa or otherwise?
So let's since we're talking about the men, let's go ahead and dive right into the top 5. So in no really, I guess it is in a particular order. We
told you the order now. We gave it away.
Exactly. Yeah. So our top 5 are in 5th, based on his average ranking or average placement, is Samuel Cornier, who we all know went team last year, followed by the 2-time.
Well, we'll talk about each one of them a little bit.
Okay, all right. Let's just dive right into that. Let's talk about the man up north.
Yeah, I mean, Cornwall has had some success in the off season before. He's had a podium finish at Wadapalooza, and he made it to the games in 2021. He had an amazing performance on test number 2, which I think this picture is actually from that test. And he, he's claimed that he got sick from the lake water that year and was never really able to have the type of performance on some of the other workouts that he believes he was capable of. And I think he missed the cut by 1 spot that year, finishing 21st. He had a couple top 10 finishes, a 2nd place on this one, and maybe 1 other. And then last year he went team, obviously Mayhem Freedom, and they did great. And I think that it is based on the history of people who've spent a year training with Rich Froning. It would be silly to think that he didn't come out of that experience with a more cerebral understanding of what it takes to excel in this sport at the highest levels. He is a very confident individual. He's a very fit guy. And I think that amongst the top 10 to 15 men, if you're looking this year, he's probably the biggest question mark, because we haven't seen him. He didn't get it. He qualified for Rogue last year, but got disqualified for not weighing his plates. He qualified for Dubai, but he decided not to go. And he didn't get an invite to Wadapalooza. And so we didn't get to see any offseason competitions from him. He did pretty well at semifinals, but it was kind of it was one of these performances when you have 10, 11, 12 people qualifying that just kind of slides into the middle, 5th, 6th, 7th, kind of the whole weekend, never in jeopardy of missing it, but nothing too flashy. Showing up at 5th overall on this list, and that consistency across the open, semifinals, and quarters. And when you start to think about some of the tests that those include, he's shown proficiency with high skill gymnastics. He's done well on the heavy snatch, heavy thruster, the barbell cycling of 275 clean and jerk workout. He's gone long with the test 1 of semifinals, test 4 of the quarterfinals. So he's, checked a bunch of boxes to end up being in this area, and he's shown to have proficiency at the games in certain tests. So when people are talking about Canadian men this year that can excel at the CrossFit Games, it usually starts with Vellner and Adler. Then you throw Fikowski into the mix, but I think that you have to consider Sam Cornwall as a legitimate top 10 threat against this year's men's field.
Yeah. To maybe a correction here is Samuel did compete at Wadapalooza. He was just on a team with Rich and Tyler, and they had to withdraw. So that would have probably gave us a little bit of idea of where he's at. He obviously he didn't get to complete that, and it was Wadapalooza on a team. But no, I totally agree with you, Brian. Obviously, he's someone who I'm really high on. I think back in 2021, I think I had him finishing in the top 5, and I think you're and then of course he got ill. But that event too, I think opened up a lot of people's eyes, and I'm looking forward to seeing him, because obviously watching him on team last year, it never looked like he was tired. That whole team never looked like they were tired. So, it'll just be fun to see him back on the floor, individual. It's going to be fun. Mike, you got anything to say about Samuel?
Yeah, and I was hearing an interview with Luke Parker, who was on Savant as well, and he talked
Mhm.
about working with Rich over the last year on in sort of the team environment, and I think the exact same thing. Obviously, Sam was on that team. Just the call outs there of how closely they were working with obviously one of the best ever. So I could definitely see that here. Sam had his best finishes was open 23.3. He won that by I think like 10 seconds, 7 seconds or something like that. And
Mhm.
then he followed it up right away. Quarterfinal test one. Both of those had the new handstand pushup in them. He won that by also about 10 seconds. So obviously high skill gymnastics, even in the sort of the Boz era of those gymnastics, he's doing really well there.
And I believe that was the other workout he did very well on. Third place in event 8 in 2021 was a handstand walk. So
Yeah.
this would be a good example of what this study can do. Is we can look at, in this case, because he placed so highly, we focused. Actually, I think for Sam, I did something different because we didn't have data on him, and I talked about the thing as much data as those other guys, and I did talk about the fact that if you get inverted, this guy is like a serious threat to have a top 3 finish. Strict handstand push-ups, handstand walking, obstacle course, those types of things, which are certainly all in play. So Sam Cornaway is someone to be on the lookout and shows very well in every stage of the season so far. Let's go to number 4.
Number 4, well, I mean, as some people might think, that was pretty surprising to see Samuel at 5th. Number 4, another surprise, but looking at the data, maybe not too much of a surprise.
No, I mean, I think that a lot of people have talked about Justin taking 5th place at the West semifinal. Now and the fact that wasn't of too much concern to them for some because the test was a little bit smaller. Now we're looking at 16 tests, a smaller field of athletes, 40, but a more competitive field. And he actually does better here than he did against just the West men at semifinals, moving up to 4th. Once again, showing just consistency basically across the board from beginning to end of the season. He did have a couple kind of subpar performances for him that keep him out of the top 3 on this, but in the mix. And I think that he's one of those athletes that kind of lends itself to the conversation we had at the start of this thing, where just, regardless of what he's done at the season, he's made it to the games, and we know how good he can be at the games. So I think that it's exciting to know that he can be beaten and that he has now been beaten for the first time in a couple of years, but no one's done it at the CrossFit Games yet. And I still think that that's for those that are just checking in. So this, there were at semifinals, there would have been, this guy's asking, did Sam win semifinal Linda? He might have won it in his semifinal, but he didn't have the best score worldwide. These are scores only against the games athletes. So Colton Mertens had the best time on that. I think David Schranke might have been 2nd and Sam 3rd, or they were really close. So even though they all won their individual semifinals, in this study, they only get credit for, only the best time worldwide gets credit for the win. Mike, do you want to add anything about Justin?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear him talk on different podcasts and things about how he wouldn't have changed much in semifinals, because I know there's been a lot of talk about how obviously he looks mortal at this point compared to where we see some other multi-time champs going into their next season. So it is interesting to look at something like this, show that he's 4th out of still in the top 5, still in the conversation, of course, still deserves all the credit, but it was interesting to have him or his coach talk about that they wouldn't have really changed much at the semifinal. They would have done it exactly the same way. And it was just that they were getting sort of beaten on a few workouts. Justin did really well. He smashed that crossover workout in the quarterfinals. Him and Ellie, I think, both out of the same gym, both won that workout. And then he also won quarterfinal test 4. I'm trying to remember which one that is.
That was the rowing GHD.
Oh yeah, exactly. He won that one by quite a bit as well. He obviously didn't fare too well, except for the test 6, which also had rowing, which also had it was sort of the kitchen sink of gymnastics and overhead squats and everything else. So he sort of talked about that as well. He knew he had to go win an event that he was good at, and that's something we'll probably see at the games as well.
Kenneth DeLab, just to be clear, these are not our picks for the CrossFit Games. This is, in case you missed the start of the episode, this is a season-long study that's taken the 16 tests that all the men did, ranked them against each other using CrossFit Games scoring. And in that model, Justin shows up fourth amongst this year's Games field. BC, let's go to number 3.
Yeah, and Kenneth, don't worry, rankings and picks, they'll be coming soon. So, jumping a little ahead of us, our friend.
Yeah, I do. I know a lot of people are putting out their picks and whatever. I like to hold mine till pretty close to the games. So I'll be putting out power rankings or predictions, whatever you like to call them, 1 through 38 for the teams, 1 through 40 for the women, and 1 through 40 for the men, starting this weekend and leading into the games next week. Checking in number 3 on our season-long study for the men is Pat Vellner. Pat is he had the most top 10 finishes of anyone on this study, 11 out of 16. And I think this is pretty expected result for him. I mean, that he's pretty consistent on most things, especially that are tested in these style competitions in the gym at the semifinals. And, a big question for him is more so at the games. I don't think he's too concerned with this stuff. So he's got his focus on the top spot at the podium this year. And I think he's going to bring the heat. I think he's going to be in it as much as he ever has been, but it won't, it certainly won't be easy, but I do think this is kind of the Vellner fan should be reinvigorated and excited by what he's done this season and just the overall landscape of the games field. I think he's right back in the mix to possibly win.
Well, I think obviously his biggest kryptonite, I think that was brought up in the story, is swimming. And Mike, you brought it up, I think, a couple weeks ago, where there's a possibility that swimming might not even be in the games this year. We don't know that for sure.
We don't know that,
but we don't know that at all. But
I like to take a lot of fun guesses. But yeah, Pat, I'm sure would enjoy that story or my Instagram story I put out on that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But
the cool and but the swimming thing is something that is kind of well known. This, again, the nice part about this study is that it allows you to learn a little bit more about the athletes. And so as we looked back, we were able to see some patterns over not just this year's season so far, but also the last couple of years at the games, and see that biking is not a great implement for Pat, along with swimming, and high volume, low skill gymnastics like chest to bar pull-ups and toes to bar in big sets are also not good. So he would much rather have a 7-round workout of 11 toes to bar than one set of 60 in the middle of a workout, for example.
Yeah, and then on he sort of gets a raw deal, because you would think of him with any long monostructural or any really monostructural that he might not be good at. He won oh, sorry, I actually had the wrong one. I was thinking semifinal test 5. Quarterfinal test 5 is the one that he won. So I'll scratch a little bit in my preamble there. He won quarterfinal test 5 that had the deadlifts and the rope climbs in it. He won that by 6 seconds. So I would look for him if a workout comes out with similar movements, I would look for him. Deadlifting
and upper body pulling are probably his two biggest strengths. Yeah. He's got several deadlifting wins to his name, and he was the one guy who beat Sam Cornway 2 years ago in that 48 muscle up workout.
Yeah.
All right, who we got at number 2?
Number 2, another surprise.
Probably the biggest surprise in the positive direction on this list overall. The really cool thing about Dallin is that he's one of, I believe, 3 athletes, along with Adler and Cornway, that didn't have a single bottom 10 finish so far this season. And if you look back at his games last year, it was plagued with a few bottom 10 finishes that really prevented him from getting the momentum that he needed to have the kind of finish that he wanted. I think Dallin even though he's already accomplished at the games in terms of his teenage career, he's qualified for the games younger than most any other male athlete has been able to do after being a teenager at the games. He's still rounding out as an athlete. He's still improving. And I think that he's in a position to kind of back this up. Maybe not with a podium finish, but with it, I think he's a top 10 candidate for sure. I actually picked him for the top 10 in the games last year. And it was a little ambitious. It's difficult to make the games as a as a rookie, or to make the top 10 as a rookie. But I think he just has that pedigree. When I watch him compete, when I watch him move, and I've kind of always felt this way, like he's the type of athlete that I expect to see in the final heat more often than not. And I think this year we might actually get a chance to see that.
Mike, anything to add?
And he's another athlete with great top 5 finishes. He finished first overall on 2 of the 16 tests, 23.2A, which is the shuttle run burpee pull-up test. And then he wasn't even the first 2 names you likely would have said at North America East for that test 7, but he was the one that obviously won that event. So and sort of shocked everybody a little bit seeing the first top men's times on that. So yeah, if he continues the momentum here, I feel really good about him, good about the Brood athletes for sure.
And that test, what he did on that test 7, that's the thing that separates him from a lot of athletes. You think of, everyone was expecting Hopper, Roman to be the guys to beat on that workout. And he basically just played the game better than them. He paced that workout better than them and was able to pick up a few seconds in the last round. And he's one of the younger guys in the field, but he has that veteran sav. He has the confidence, like Justin Medeiros, to hold back a little bit in round 1, make a little move in round 2 and lay the hammer down in round 3 and take the points from his other competitors. If he's able to do that at the games this year, the way that he did at semifinals, yeah, he's pretty dangerous.
We'll move on to number 1. Really no surprise for me. Oops, sorry.
No, Jeff Adler's a huge, he does so well at every stage of competitions, open, quarterfinal, semifinals, games. He's gotten to the point where you can't just count him out of anything. And the consistency here is, unparalleled. Obviously, he's the top guy. And I think that, the question really remains of how good can he possibly do at the games? It's a very likely chance that he makes the podium, but it's going to be a difficult battle, and it's going to be one that comes right down to the end. From everything I've seen and know, there's nothing that's really stood in his way so far, and it still seems like he's moving in the right direction. But to podium at the CrossFit Games is a massive challenge and a huge accomplishment. I think that for Adler, any supporters, fans of his, like that is the goal this year, is to get onto that podium. And I certainly think he has a chance to do it.
Yeah, and then looking at these 16 tests is sort of a games like amount of events. He has one this is sort of the playbook you hear about another athlete last year. He has 1 win over that entire 16 tests, but 9 of his tests are in the top 5. That's over 50% of the. Again, I'm going to say tests and events so many times, but over the 50% of those, he finished in the top 5. That's the same number for how many times he finished in the top 10. So when he was doing well on test events, whatever, he was doing really well. And that's the type of thing we saw from Justin over the last couple of years. And Jeff is doing the same thing. And he's still getting better with him and Caroline Lambre coaching him. He's still getting better year over year from when we saw him like in the 2020 games. Like he's still on an up, sort of going up and to the right as we watch him here. So it's really cool.
All right.
We'll move on to the ladies.
Yeah. And just so you guys know, we're probably going to try to wrap this up right around 9:30. If you have not been following along with the Sevan podcast, he's been doing kind of what I view as like the complementary work to the statistical study. So what we're trying to show you guys is we got all these numbers and the data of the athletes and what they've done so far this year and what you can expect to see from them at the games. Sevan and Matt Souza and the guys over there have pursued trying to talk to all of the athletes or as many games athletes as possible in the run-up. James Sprague is joining them tonight. And so we're going to clear out at 9:30 and encourage you guys to head over there and hang out with Sevan and James. It's always a fun time. We'll do the same for the women. This is part 7, PC.
Oh, it is.
So well, yes, there you go.
Before we start off with the women, was there any surprises outside the top 5 before we get into the top 5?
I mean, I think that something that I really like was Manion Angonis, 13th place. I think she's a good candidate for Rookie of the Year this year coming out of Europe. We know the European women always fare very well. So check out, be on the lookout for Manion at the games this year to maybe have a maybe a chance to sneak into that 20 on Sunday.
Mike?
I'd say a name you don't see there, but has been in a lot of talks for podium contention this year. Danielle Brandon. She's 8th, so she was on that last graphic you were showing there for just a second. But it's really showing Emma Carey, Emma Lawson, obviously within that top 5 we'll talk about. Those younger athletes are showing up really well. So that's why you're not seeing Annie or Danielle on this graphic here.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the top 5 here. So starting off with number 5, Emma Lawson.
Yeah, keep it kind of brief for Emma Lawson. I mean, she's obviously she's super young. She was super impressive last year. I think that even though the field of women has changed a little bit, it hasn't necessarily gotten easier to make progress into the top 5. She was 6th last year, so I think that if she can move up 1 or 2 spots, that's a great season for her. I think it's gonna be tough for her to make the podium, but so far this year, she's been kind of right where you'd expect, hovering around that top 5.
Mike, anything to add?
I'll just keep calling the highlights here of the reporting. Her event win was on that. We saw her have that race with Emma Carey right at the end of that complex and burpee box jump event. So she had 61. That wins the event worldwide.
Moving on, another young, I guess, an alumni of the teen division is Paige Powers.
Yeah, and you'd ask us to give you a surprise pick outside the top 5, but I think Paige Powers is clearly the surprise showing up here in the top 5. Very similarly to Dallin Pepper, the big question this year is how good has she gotten? If you watch the North American East women this year, there were 6 women, and those 6 women were all within 50 points of each other at the top. Then there was a 150-point drop to the 7th place qualifier. I considered all 6 of the, at this point, I have to consider all 6 of those women as at the very least top 15 and strong contenders for the top 10. If Paige Powers is able to claw her way into the top 10 this year, I believe that'd be either a 15 or 16 spot improvement. If she finishes 10th over last year's performance, which is quite a remarkable jump in 1 year. And when you realize that she, went toe to toe with Emma Carey, Danielle Brandon, Emma Lawson, Amanda Barnhart, Alexis Raptis, all of whom are likely top 10 finishers and who people are regularly picking there, but you don't hear people picking Paige Powers for the top 10. She's shown up 4th on this list. She was in the mix with all those top contending women at semifinals, and I think she's a great candidate possibly to win the Most Improved award this year.
Yeah, and she showed that out at Wodapalooza as well. Obviously, there was a little bit of talk about Wodapalooza with who was really there, and some of the athletes that she didn't get to compete against there obviously will be here at the games. But the upward, again, to talk similar to her and athletes on the men's side, the upward trajectory of Paige Powers, as Brian just talked about, she could make a huge leap here and really work off the momentum that she started in January in Miami.
Yeah. I agree. Let's stick with the teen alums, that theme, and move on to another one.
I think 4 out of 5 here.
Oh, you're ruining it. You're ruining it, Brian.
But just Emma to say, Carey, the strength of the women's field is, missing Mal O'Brien, missing Haley Adams. It's still very young and still very, very impressive. Emma Carey, I think, is a huge question mark at the games. I mean, the fact that she, was able to beat that list of women that I just listed from the North American East semifinal, I think got a lot of people, got their attention. 2 years ago at the games, seems like it was either the volume or maybe that back injury was starting to bother her, but she didn't kind of have enough to put it together for the entire weekend. I think that, especially considering how young she is, the discipline she's shown with Matt Torres down in Naples to take the long approach with this, make sure she can get back to compete. She competes hard. She doesn't know how to compete any other way. So you need to be healthy enough to do that. I think she's healthy enough to do that. And, I don't know what her ceiling is. I'm probably going to put her in the middle of the top 10 somewhere, 5, 6, 7, something like that. But is she a podium contender? Absolutely. And like I just said, I don't know what the top potential is for her.
She's the only athlete on the worldwide ranking that we did that has 3 total event wins. She won 2 of the open events, and then the last event, the semifinal event, 7. So, I mean, a lot still to know about it. Emma, as Brian said, like there's a lot still to see. So it's a hard ranking to give on somebody that we didn't get to see her compete last year in the same way.
We'll move on to another teen alum and someone that we have seen a lot of, Gabby McDowell.
And it's probably worth mentioning that across these 16 tests, the margin between Emma Carey and Gabby McGowan was 7 points, and the margin between Gabby McGowan and Laura Horvath was 1 point. So 8 points between those three women over the 16 tests we've had this year is probably all that you need to know about how potentially exciting this CrossFit Games could be on the women's side with so many women in the battle. I think that, and probably rightfully so, the money's on Laura to win, but Gabby is nipping at her heels in pretty much every single way, including taking the win at the semifinals. And so it should be no surprise that she shows up really high on this list. I think that, similarly to BKG, she was not happy with the finish she had last year at the games. I believe it was 8th. And I expect her to make quite an improvement on that this year.
And we'll just move on to Laura.
Yep. I'll leave it there with Brian. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Laura Horvath, she comes in like I said, 1 point ahead of Gabby. And keep in mind that there have been 3 workouts with strict handstand push-ups out of these 16, and she still checks in with the top score. So that's probably boding fairly well for her, because we can expect one at most that is going to have a strict handstand push-up that's going to stop her in her tracks. And if, those don't show up every single year at the games, and if that doesn't show up this year, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario that, absent injury or illness, that someone could beat her. But I would have said the same thing at semifinals, that I thought she was going to win it pretty easily, and she finished 3rd there. So you always have to go and still do the job.
Mike,
yeah, totally. And Laura and Gabby, 11 of their 16 event finishes here within the top 10. Laura had 8, and that's the highest number of anybody, men or women. Actually, I'm sorry. Jeff Adler had 9. But for the women, she had 8, which is the highest for the women of anyone finishes in the top 5. So killer instinct, similar that we've seen to other champions in the past. When they show up to win the events. They're placing within those top 5, top 10 ranges, no bottom finishes, and just really showing out and making sure that they're doing the right thing consistently.
Yeah. So kind of put a kind of a bow on this before we sign off, and everyone can head on over to Sevon's channel to see what James Sprague's up to. Is like, we have obviously we completed the spotlights, and then we've compiled all the data and some useful information here. Mike's made some his spreadsheets available. I think it'd be for those who signed on to the Heat One app, this will be very fun stuff to just look over and send out there. But just a lot of good information. We appreciate the support and all of that. A couple things here. Melinda said she got her B.Friendly shirt today. So if you were part of the pre-sale, you should be expecting those. And if you get them, tag us on it. Show us what it looks like. Scott here had a little like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Brian's back to give us some great content. Why, you beautiful fucking bird fly. Scott, the thing is, we have some cool stuff on the horizon that you're going to see a lot more of Brian during the games, and Mike as well. So just be on the lookout. We're going to make some announcements this week, and we got some cool stuff planned next week. And this one comes from our friends who Get With The Programming.
Not tonight. Yeah. So thank you guys for checking in. If you're interested in this stuff, there's some good stuff on the website. Go read about the athletes, learn about them. If you have not signed up for the Heat One app yet, check it out. This can be a huge help for you if you're trying to play the shot caller or the top 10. And there's a challenge going on. If you beat me on both of those games, then you'll be in the running to win some prizes that we have some sponsors throwing some stuff in for. So hopefully engage with the games, get to know some of the athletes more, follow along. And like Patrick said, we'll have a bunch more stuff coming up in the run-up to the games and at the games to keep you guys on track with everything you want to know.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Head on over to the channel. Check it out. Say hi to James Sprague. See you guys in the chat. And as always, be friendly, our friends.